So, guys, I want to talk about the 48-hour film project. And I know I've done a couple of videos about this in the past. And, what happened was that my YouTube channel got hacked into. So, I had to restart my YouTube channel. And I did a video talking about my bad experience. But I do want to mention that I've really thought about this. And I decided that I do want to actually, just talk about what happened to me. And there's a couple of reasons for this that I dealt with some forms of discrimination that happened to me, and it's never been addressed or brought to attention, even though I've actually spoke out about it. And then the other thing too is that I just think that to be fair with the competition, they advertise it to be a competition that is respectful and appreciative of everybody, but that was not the experience that I got. But I also want to highlight some important things that I've learned, like the importance of knowing when to let things go, the importance of being able to read people, and then also too this understanding that people are not right to you. It means that there's something more wrong with them, and then not you. So what happened to me is that I participated in one of the cities of in 2020 in 2014, and what happened was that I went to one of the kickoff events where you actually meet a bunch of people who want to join teams, like a little party about like, hey, let's get together, let's talk a little bit, and let's join a team really. So when I did that, I remember like the city producer and one of her friends was saying, hey, it's great that a black man is doing the competition, and they're kind of like snickering and grinning. And then I also remember, another filmmaker saying, hey, why don't you want me to join your team, Byron? Is it because you are a black man and black people just want to work with other black people? And I've also worked with many filmmakers in that city, and some people say, hey, I worked with a black man, I worked with Byron, a black guy. So there was like the first sign where a bunch of people were just pointing out my skin color and saying, working out with this black guy. And I do understand that this was before 2016, so obviously that type of behavior was not considered inappropriate. But it's also the other thing too, where I'm nice and easygoing, and some people look at me. I have a hard time making eye contact because I went through emotional abuse growing up, really. So some people may be like, hey, you know what? Maybe Byron is special needs, or maybe comes off as a little naive. So I'm going to talk to him whatever type of way. You can call a person like Radio stupid or slow, or make fun of his race because he doesn't stand up for himself. But and you know what I'm trying to say with that example of like how some people pick and choose who they are gonna disrespect or talk about their skin color for. So that was kind of like the first thing, and then I kind of like told myself, what, maybe I shouldn't do this competition. Maybe I should just walk out and send a message to the city producer, like saying, hey, I'm not going to do this because people are being disrespectful to me. And then the other thing that happened at the event was the city producer was talking to me, and she was like broadcasting to everybody that, hey, Byron does multiple 48s. You know what? I'm going to shut down like roads and other things for him so he can actually, go make his film or other things like that. Like almost like, maybe in a way just saying like, I can do this for you, I can do that for you. And I really felt the element of, they were trying to teach me a lesson, like two things, like that if I do the 48, I'm just a black guy. And then the other thing that is what they're trying to teach me is I gotta accept their favors, really, because if I accept their favors, then it looks like I'm part of the group, really. If you're naive to that, or you say no, I'm better than accepting favors or working with others, then you know what? It's like you're part of the clique or you're not part of the clique. That's it. Um, and then what happened was that I made a film for them for their July competition, and my film wasn't good in any way. I was still a very young filmmaker. I was still learning and all that stuff. So I remember like when my film was in theaters, the credits were like the title screens were very big. So I remember like some of the audience saying, what, wow, those titles are very big. I had a very hard time with stories because I would kind of make it all philosophical and have people speak in a very abstract way. So a lot of people didn't get my story. So I was remembering like somebody saying "huh" and "what," or "I don't get it." And then when I actually looked over, it was actually the city producer making those comments. And then what happened was that the award show, um, my film was nominated for Best Child Actress, and the film actually lost to somebody who said one line of dialogue. And the city producer said, when she read off the nominations, whatever film Byron created. And and then a lot of people were kind of like, just kind of cringing as well, really, because they kind of just knew that this person had a, thing about being snippy or passive aggressive comments. But sometimes, how it is with friends or people who run events, that sometimes, they're just, that people let it go, really, because they just don't, like, people just don't hold them accountable, really. So I remember, like, when the other team won the award, the mother of the child actors actually walked up to me and say, like, she felt that I shouldn't have won. And then I got mad and I kind of said, okay, it's an unfair competition, it's politics. And I've also heard this city producer say a couple of things at the events, like she pulls favorites with Mark Rupert to give New England a certain edge. Like, what she said was that what they do is that, for New England, that she said she talked to Mark Rupert and they split New England into a district. So that means there's like there's 8 or 9 like cities, like, New York City, Buffalo, Albany, um, New Haven, Connecticut, um, like, I think, like, maybe New London, Connecticut, or Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire. And what happens is that, the winner, like the best film winners, they get a spot at con. So it's gonna be like 1 in 10 versus, like, a few people from the U.S., like 1 or 2 from the U.S. So you have like maybe a one in, instead of 1 in 50 chance of being at con, you have a 1 in 13 chance because she pulled that favor. She did say that. Um, and then also, the other thing too was that I remember how there was one team, and there was a Woman in Films award for that competition, and there was over 20 people nominated for that award. And a lot of people were kind of saying, oh, well, it's because, they're friends with her and other things like that. So, there was two things about it. Like, when this woman was telling me about her child daughter winning, she like, she probably was kind of instigating me because she knew that I was kind of sensitive about it, so I should have been careful about that. And then the other thing that I heard was that, the little girl who won, her stepfather was one of the judges. So it's one of those things too where I was wrong because I mouthed off, and then I also went on Facebook and I mouthed off about saying it's an unfair competition. And also, when I went to and when I was, like, saying things online or at the event, I was saying under my breath. The state producer heard me, and they kind of gave me the look of, like, what, they just got mad by what I said, really. And then they sent me an email criticizing my film and then ending it with, like, saying I'm just saying, really. So I reported that to Mark Rupert. He never got back to me. But I learned a couple of things from that situation, and the big things that I've learned was that, honestly, it was very evidential that it was a toxic environment. Like, honestly, the first time you go into a city and people are talking about your skin color, that's a red flag. When people who are running the event are saying things like, hey, I pull favorites with Mark Rupert and other things like that, that's a red flag. And then also, you have, people that are instigating you, or you have people who are running events, criticizing your film publicly. Hey, that's something that is very, concerning. So what happened was that, yes, I've shared to many city producers at that time that I really cared about winning awards because I really believed in my potential. I really believed in the expectation of that I'm going to put in the work and I'm going to put in the quality to win an award, really. And it's not necessarily arrogance in my eye. It was insecurity. It was like saying, what, I expect great things for myself. I expect to do something so great that I can win awards or win best film because I believe in my potential to achieve something like that. That's almost like saying, hey, what, I believe that I'm going to end up in Hollywood one day because I expect that from myself because I know a lot about filmmaking or I'm very talented. It's kind of like the same type of, I believe that I can achieve this by my hard work. So it kind of read to many city producers as arrogant. So what happened was that I remember, like, I participated in the Antwerp Belgium competition. I won a couple awards, and I shared it with the city producer, and she was like saying, like, wow, you really thought it really comes off like it won the whole competition with how you shared it to me. And then they were like, hey, you know what, you bashed me, be careful of who you step on. And other things like that. And I apologized. They never got back to me. And then I participated in their competition in the 2016 season. And when I registered, they sent in, they put in their Facebook group like they're happy to have me back and they congratulate me. And then they sent me an email after that saying, hey, I hope you learn winning isn't everything. I hope you don't go around saying that you should have won the whole competition. I hope you don't complain to Mark Rupert this year. And then they also said something like, you, I know you want to do all the 48-hour film projects that you can, like a very, very like kind of condescending and undermining and really disrespectful tone. And one of the things that I should have done and I regret not doing was that I should have just, attached that email to Mark Rupert and then asked for a refund because obviously, that's just not okay, really. Or sometimes I wish that I was so vindictive that I attached that email to their Facebook group or in a bunch of like filmmaker groups and saying, hey, this is how my city producer talks to me. So I've told the story many times that I was going through a very hard time in my life. My father was running for governor for a certain state, and he mentioned on the in his commercials that he raised children who are black with autism. And I mentioned this many times that I have a African American and Native American mother, so I'm less than 25% black, and I also have a white father, really, and also too that I was adopted out of abuse and neglect, and I got a psychiatric evaluation when I was 1 year old, saying that I had mental health issues because I couldn't put a puzzle together, and like I've said many times, that because my mother was in trouble with the law a bunch of times because she had a pattern of violent behavior. Mama has an issue, the Sonny boy has an issue. And then also, I was adopted by a white family who wants me to be a black child, or accepted I'm a black child instead of mixed. And then also, I did grow up with a bunch of emotional abuse, some child abuse, and that impacted my mental health, really. Like I told people that my parents would poke me in the sides, or sometimes they would smack me when I'm not looking, so I would startle really easily. I wouldn't make eye contact because I remember sometimes when I was a kid, my dad would grab my face and make me look at him in the eyes, or sometimes my dad would punch a wall, or I used to be very naive and manipulative. No, I'm manipulable. Like my parents would like say lies, or they would just interrogate me or intimidate me to get information out of me, or other things like that. So I did grow up with a bunch of emotional abuse. I also suffered from PTSD because I went through a lot of workplace bullying, sexual harassment, workplace violence through my life, really, so that impacted my mental health. So it's ultimately like a lot of factors have contributed to my trauma and how I respond to my trauma. But I also worked at a job where I was almost murdered by the police. I dealt with workplace bullying. The store was robbed by its own security guards. So there's the context. So I remember like at one of the events, people were sharing stories about their films. So what happened was that I shared to the audience that my film was inspired by many of the rough years that I had. I shared that I almost got arrested a couple of times. Yes, that's true. I also shared that I worked at a job that was robbed by some security guards, and police officers were aiming guns at me, and the person who robbed the store aimed a gun to the back of my head, and my boss was laughing his ass off about the fact that I was almost murdered. And then I said I struggled with suicidal thoughts for many, many years, including kind of like some really sadistic thoughts. And I remember like the city producer was chuckling and snickering because I came off like a special needs person that shares too much about themselves. Like I've known some people who are autistic and they share like, a lot of personal things. Like I had like a friend in college who shared that he drew a girl naked because he was part of a art class where they drew nude models. I've actually seen girls talk about their menstrual cycle or a lot about their sex life who are autistic because they don't have a sense of a filter or they have naivety, really. So it kind of came off like that to the city producer, that it kind of came off like I'm making a fool of myself. I'm coming off like a stupid ass for sharing too much. But when I started to talk really about like, just the suicidal thoughts and the sadism, that's when they kind of acted like a little bit more shocked, really. And I think that one disturbing thing was that maybe they kind of felt like, hey, now this guy's getting some sympathy because, when somebody talks about suicide really deeply, that's how you gain sympathy. But I think that the other part of it, and the most important part, was that I made a very uncomfortable environment for everybody, because that's a taboo subject matter, and that also makes somebody look unstable. And as we all know, that sometimes if you share with a psychiatrist, or publicly struggle with suicide, or even if you say, hey, that's how I felt a few years ago, sometimes they have to call the cops. Sometimes they have to call an ambulance and be like, hey, we got to take this guy away, because now we don't know if he still has that. Now he's putting other people in danger. Now he may be a danger to himself, really. But I lost control of my emotions, really, because I was going through a hard time. And then I remember the city producer making sarcastic gasping sounds and other things like that. And I kind of understood why later. Like, I think at the time I felt like they were just trying to instigate or be insensitive to what I'm saying. But what I learned is, more than likely, they were just trying to be like, I don't want to be in this moment right now, because they went from having a competition where a lot of people have spoke highly about this city producer, to now you have somebody doing this, and then it makes the competition look like, hey, you know what, it's for everybody, even the people who are emotionally unstable, really. And I told the story that some guy was screaming and yelling at the top of his lung for me to just stop speaking, really. And then I had another breakdown where I was speaking in a southern accent, like dissociative identity disorder. And then I kind of was saying, my film was inspired by a lot of the traumatic things that I went through. Sometimes there are writers who take a wound or a pain that they've been through and turn it into a story. Sometimes your darkest days can inspire your brightest stories. Or there's writers like Dostoevsky who turned his trauma into stories. Or there are some writers who almost make each character like a piece of a thing they struggle with. Maybe it's based on a heartbreak, and the characters are part of the heartbreak, like maybe an ex-girlfriend who cheated on them. Or maybe there's some people who have insecurities, like maybe somebody who has a fear of flying. So maybe a character is a metaphor for their fear of flying, and another character is a metaphor for all the help that they got to overcome that fear of flying. Like the yin and yang of overcoming an issue. Or in my case, a lot of my stories are really just hinting on the fact that I'm in a lot of pain psychologically. And I would rather do that than kill myself. I'd rather do that than struggle. Like, I'm trying to overcome my own pain. I'm trying to turn my life around. I'm trying to not be my worst enemy. And I got applause for that. But I remember when I walked by this guy, he was snickering, grinning, like giving me the look of, you know what, yeah. Oh yeah, Byron, I get to yell in your face and you can't do anything about it. Ha ha ha. Or the look of, you know what, wow, you're a special needs African American little boy, and I can treat you whatever type of way, really. And that's kind of where I struggled for many years, because I think in one sense, I felt that the city producer instigated me by the emails. I felt that the city producer instigated me by jeering me in the audience, really. So I remember, it took me about, 8 or 9 years of thinking about what happened every single day, and being, really just, just like in my emotions about it. Like, imagine, every single day, you have a bad day at work and you're thinking about that day, for 9 or 10 years. It made me made me feel very uncomfortable of working with other people, because I felt like, what, people don't respect me or respect my stories. And I talked to my psychiatrist, and he did say that you have to understand that filmmaking is a very hard industry. There are places like, what, if I was like said something like, hey, I struggle with suicidal thoughts. That's why I became a person who works at a psychiatric hospital to help people. I said, if I share that at a job where if I was a psychiatrist and I shared that at a job where I was a psychiatrist, people would be applauded, people would be moved. But if I shared that among filmmakers who are known to be asshole people, because it's all about competition and ego and people wanting validation, really, and sensitivity, you're going to be laughed at. You're going to be like told to shut up, really, because filmmakers are not the nicest people in the world, really. Filmmakers are assholes. And filmmakers are very fake people. That's just kind of like, the industry. Like, if somebody was a porn star and they said, hey, you know what, I had a really rough childhood, but I like what I'm doing, really, it's the same thing. Do people, your agency doesn't care about you if you're a porn star. They care about the money that they're making off of you. So some industries don't really care. That's one thing I had to learn. The next thing that I had to fucking learn, it was that I pulled a CM Punk. I got instigated, and it was my own fucking fault for responding with a lot of emotional maturity. It didn't matter that my father said some very inaccurate and hurtful things about me. in this campaign. And it also did not matter that I was instigated by a city producer. I should have said, hey, I'm going to take a screenshot of what you said, or I'm going to send a reply to Mark Rupert, and he's going to see this, and I'm going to say, hey, I want out of this competition, or hey, if you don't give me a refund, I'm just going to move on, and I'm not coming back to this city because of how I'm being treated. But you need to talk to your city producer and say, hey, that's it. That's enough. You have to be respectful to everybody. If you don't like this person or you felt too butthurt by what he said last year, then I'll just tell him, hey, you know what? You guys just need to separate. Participate in other cities, and you will be treated fairly. And ignore this person. I'll separate you early on. So I should have done that really. But yeah, I've done videos and talked about what happened. Yes, I went through a bunch of different emotions. I think on one side, I felt angry at the state producer. I felt she instigated me. And then on another side, I felt very guilty about my behavior and upsetting people and seeing people like grab their kids and walk away from, because I was like, man, I was an asshole for what I did really. But it took me a very long time. But what I realized was, you know what? Yes, it was my fault that I blew up on stage. And yes, there is accountability for my parents saying hurtful things, because you know what? We should not be saying hurtful things about people. The other thing is, yes, people who run events and run film festivals should not instigate other people. So there was accountability on a bunch of different sides. And that's what I had to realize. But I also spoke badly about this city producer, and I shared my story to many people over the years. And I think that, as one of my friends said, it's very evidential that you should just leave the 48 in the past, really. And I've learned sometimes in life you got to leave things in the past. Yes, I think standing up for ourselves is very important, but sometimes you leave things in the past. And then I did that another year, and I participated on a team. I did a really great job editing for the team. People congratulated my work, but I remember the city producer and one of her friends just grabbing their mouths and pointing their finger at me and chuckling and snickering, just to give me another type of, fuck you for what you did last year. I'm going to be vindictive. And then I had a bunch of bad feelings for a couple of years. And I remember, again, I spoke badly about the city producer. I talked to other city producers about what happened. I even talked to Brian Bowers, who was a higher up really, but they did the old thing of saying, we're going to take care of it. We're going to address it, but they actively ignore it. And that happens in a bunch of companies as well. Like I've said, I'm a fan of AEW, but a lot of people will do that because sometimes with the 48, what they also want to do is, sometimes when people have bad experiences, they may want to ignore it because they want you to just quit the competition and keep the city producer if they're making a bunch of money. If it's a city producer that has a bad reputation, other people are saying, hey, you know what, I had this issue, he has this issue, 5 people have this issue, 6 people have this issue. Oh, well, let's not draw that much money. It's kind of motivation to get rid of it. They're going to be very political about that. So what happened was that a few years ago, this city producer just had enough really of what I said really about about my comments or trying to reach out to her to make peace and whatever. So they reached out to Mark Rupert, and then he sent me an email and he said, hey, you know what, I apologize that you had a bad experience, but you've said some very hurtful things about this person. I could ban you from the competition, but he chose to put me on a probationary period, which meant you can't do this city that you had an issue with, but I can go to other cities. So I was being stupid, and what I did was that I was doing behind the scenes photography for another city, and I was sharing with everybody and being like, hey guys, you know what? This is some fleck of good that I'm doing with the competition. So this city producer found out about it, and they told that city producer that I was doing the behind the scenes photography for at their event, that I was not allowed there. And what happened was that this city producer that I was doing the behind the scenes photography for, she sent me an email back saying that if you show up to my award show, I will press charges. I will press trespassing charges. I explained this all to Mark Rupert, and he said, hey, there's a misunderstanding. And then this city producer that told me that I couldn't go to the award show and do behind the scenes photography, she said that she would pay for my hotel room. That never happened. And then this city producer that I had an issue with was saying things like, every city producer in the 48-hour film project is getting an email about you and your behavior and what you've been up to. You should do other competitions. There are hundreds of other competitions, and deep down in my heart of hearts, the biggest thing that you have an issue with was awards. And that was kind of the end of it. And they also said, if you ever contact me again, I will press charges against you. So it turned into, harassment. And like I've said before, that honestly, if this was to go to court and this was to be a big issue, they would look at everything that this person's doing. They would hear my story and they would say, hey, both of you got to go down, really. It can't just be one sided. Or they may say, we got to give this guy leniency because of, counter harassment and other things that you've been doing. And as I've told some people and as I've told some of my friends, when they look at it, it was more than likely this person trying to, fire off two more shots, really, by saying, hey, this is all your fault and this is because you're a sore loser. Not, hey, well, you did my competition. There are people making racist comments about you, including some of my friends. I've instigated you many times. And also, many people allege that there's been some significant unfairness. Oh, well, hey, people ignore you reaching out and sharing your grievances. It really just turned into, what, fuck all that, really. We want to give you a bad experience. We want to fire off some shots at you because we don't want you to come back, really. And then a few years ago, this city producer stepped down because there were some articles about them that were on the news, doing some forms of discrimination at their job and then workplace bullying, and then knowing how to kind of use their job to kind of get out of trouble, really. So, again, it was a situation where it was a very clear pattern of this person as a city producer, and then a very clear pattern of this person as a person in their workplace at a government job, going into it, doing some form of discrimination, doing some form of doing whatever they wanted, doing some form of getting other people in trouble, not taking accountability, and then walking away with a bunch of accolades or honors and whatever. In this case, they retired with a pension before they had a disciplinary hearing, and then we don't know the future of that. But it was and then that's when they took me off the probationary period. But the point, and then, when they took me off, it was shared to me that the reason why they took me off was that they felt that I realized how my actions impact others. But 100%, they did nothing to say, hey, you know what? You clearly had a situation with a city producer that was not professional. This city producer needs a couple conversations about how to work with people and also how to understand if people have criticism, you don't be vindictive. Or, hey, you know what? If you have a situation with a city producer and and there's disrespect on both sides, really, it's better for you to do another city. There was no type of, follow up or whatever, really. So yeah, and I don't know if this person's going to be back, really, or I don't know, because they do have a Hall of Fame for the 40-hour film projects. They can easily say, hey, you know what? You gave us like 15 good years. We're going to put you in there, really. But the point of it is that, it was very unfortunate that it happened, really. And then also, like I've shared, that, I'm naive. Some people have thought that I'm autistic, really, and it makes it more disturbing and more offensive if people think that I'm autistic or special needs and I get treated like this, being taken advantage of. Because, like I've said to some people in the higher-ups, that I could make a case to the American Disabilities Association, or I can make a case to the NAACP and other things about that you guys take advantage of people with minorities. You take advantage of people with special needs or minorities because of what I've experienced, especially just saying you're going to do something and then you never do anything about it. You want me to run out of steam, really. But I've also learned that, honestly, if there are some red flags, you have to log it and you have to report it. And then sometimes I've learned that, hey, if the 40-hour film project is not a good experience or any other competition, you got to keep a log, you got to share it with people so people are held accountable. Or sometimes the best thing to do is move on, really. But it really detrimented me. I felt like I could not do films after 2016 because I felt like, hey, people are going to treat me like I'm stupid. I work in a film community where there's a lot of entitlement. There's a lot of times people will join a project, try to take it over. There's a lot of times where people will join a project, say, hey, I'm going to be there bright and early, and then they no show, really. So I understand that, part of what I dealt with is also kind of very systematic of the film community that I live in, of just being like, a pick and choose who you're going to be an asshole to. And that's very, very unfortunate. But I think that me sharing the story just highlights a couple of things, which is that understand that the 40-hour film project is a competition that I feel is a cult of personality. I feel can be problematic, but I also feel that their mentality has always been, if you have an issue with somebody and you are not somebody who makes them money, or if you have an issue with somebody and it's a state producer who makes them a lot of money, sometimes they overlook it really and it becomes a cult of personality. Or they want you to go away so they can allow whoever they want to continue to do what they're doing really. And that's not good and that's not fair to anybody. Like I've said before, and as I've said many times, if I was a city producer and there was a person who was like Asian and somebody said, hey, look at the Chinese filmmaker, look at this Chinaman or whatever, I would say, hey, let's talk. You're out of my competition because you don't go up to somebody that you don't know and you point your finger and say, hey, you know what, look, there's a black man doing the competition, whatever. So I think for all fairness, I'm very, very happy that I've talked about this like one more time. And none of this is to defame the competition. None of this is to defame the city producer that I issue with or give you anything that's evidential of who this person is. But this is really just to say, you know what, this did happen. It was not right. It was not dealt with professionally. And with the 40-hour film project, I think it's important to share both good and bad experiences because this way it says, you know what, hey, there is a microscope on this competition, and ultimately they have to be a competition where they're fair to everybody. And if they are a competition that is problematic, then people have to speak out about it because it was intended to be an environment where any filmmaker and anybody can be the filmmaker that they want to be, not a competition where not a competition where it's supposed to be political, not a competition where people get discouraged, or not a competition where people make inappropriate racist remarks, or our friends do it, or people say, oh well, somebody might be mentally ill, we're going to treat them whatever type of way. If those are issues of the competition, it needs to be brought to the light.